Take a network break. I'm Drew Conry-Murray.
I'm Jonna Johnson.
Jonna, I don't know about you. I've had a lot of Halloween candy, so I'm going to just skip the virtual donut this week.
I wish I'd had Halloween candy. This is the one time a year I get to eat candy corns, but it just wasn't in the cards for yesterday. But I'm still
I
skipping
missed
the
candy
donut.
corns. I missed candy corns. I got to go out and get some.
Yes, yes, they're still fresh. They're still fresh.
They never expire. Yeah. So regardless of whether you're having a virtual donut with us or not, this week we've got stories on Google and Aviatrix beefing up their traffic shaping capabilities and security, Microsoft forcing MFA and Entra ID, new feature announcements from Extreme and Cisco, and financial results from Juniper, Intel, and Amazon. Let's get started. But first, you can join Palo Alto Networks at SASE Converge 2024. This is an on-demand virtual event. It delves into all the latest SASE advancements designed to safeguard your data, streamline your operations, and secure your hybrid workforce. Go to sassyconverge.paloaltonetworks.com to register. That's sassyconverge.paloaltonetworks.com to register. And just a couple of promos for the Packet Pushers. We just launched a new podcast. It's called N is for Networking. It's hosted by Ethan Banks and Holly Metlitsky. And the podcast is targeted at new network engineers and focuses on fundamental concepts. The first episode has dropped. It's on frames versus packets. And last but not least, we have a merch store that's just launched. If you want t-shirts, sweatshirts, mugs, hats, notebooks with the Packet Pushers logo or your favorite podcast logo, go to store.packetpushers.net. All right, Jonna, kick us off with some news.
Okay, great. Thanks, Drew. Well, first and foremost, Google has just added traffic shaping to its cross-cloud interconnect. Google has specifically added two forms of traffic management to the cloud interconnect service that GCP users can use to deploy to connect to infrastructure they have in AWS, Azure, Oracle Cloud, or Alibaba. What they can now do is prioritize traffic types so that packets in more latency and loss sensitive classes of traffic, like video conferencing, can get handled ahead of packets from other less performance sensitive types of class traffic, like bulk file transfer. Users can also apply caps as a percentage of capacity on traffic classes to make sure that prioritization doesn't lead to resource starvation, which is always a good thing. A couple of articles to link to, but I just want to highlight that I like this because I've been making a big deal over the past several, months to years about Google's heavy reliance on selling eyeballs to advertisers. As of 2023, that was 77% of their revenue. So Google is now facing an existential threat from AI as, Copilot this is beginning to replace Google this. And I'm
Right.
picking on Copilot because it's not Google, although Google is playing very well in the AI space.
Yes.
But what's happening is AI is beginning to eat into the advertising revenue. And so Google's future really depends on both diversification generally and the ability to pivot to selling products to customers, which is not something it's historically been good at. And in this broader context, what I like about this is they're beefing up the networking capabilities of its cloud interconnect service, which is something that actual enterprise customers really need and will find valuable. And B, it's the emphasis is on the cloud interconnect, which sort of acknowledges the reality of a multi-cloud environment from
Yeah.
Google, which makes Google therefore more attractive to enterprise users. So from a Google perspective, it's showing that it's pivoting in the right direction.
Yeah, that's what I caught into, that Google sort of course, has always had to acknowledge it was operating in a multi-cloud environment because it's always sort of been in the US, number 3 in the rankings. So the fact that it will play nicely with others in terms of that cloud interconnect just makes a ton of sense. It does make Google potentially more attractive to folks who are looking at a multi-cloud strategy or being forced into a multi-cloud strategy either way. And of course, network engineers love to do traffic prioritization and shaping, so it's great that they can get their hands on these controls in Google.
And I would just add one thing. I like the fact that they're using simplicity, which is really the case. I mean, people have come up with all sorts of prioritization metrics or prioritization levels, and it turns out that basically what works most of the time for most users and most traffic environments is, latency and loss sensitive, priority 1, and everything else priority 2. You don't have to get more granular than that. So I like the
Right, keep it
fact that
simple.
it's, as simple as it needs to be.
For sure.
Moving on to another cloud networking announcement, Aviatrix is beefing up transit and security features in its cloud networking platform. They've added hybrid cloud transit to its secure cloud networking offering, which extends the Aviatrix fabric into colo provider infrastructures such as Equinix and NAS provider networks like Megaport, allowing resources connected through those infrastructures to join an Aviatrix infrastructure with the same level of simplicity as it connects to cloud. It's also expanded its distribute cloud firewall by integrating threat intelligence and geo-blocking into it. So you can basically say this traffic can never go into this region. These are two good announcements, and from my perspective, once again, there's a bigger picture here, which is we constantly advise clients to, before they make any moves in cloud, think through their workload placement policy, which is
Mhm.
literally a blueprint that says, where do we put different workloads and why? And the answer can be, well, we put them in cloud for reasons of agility, accessibility, whatever, flexibility. We put them in colo for reasons of security. We
Mhm.
keep them on prem for various reasons. Whatever your reasons are, and that's a much longer conversation. The point is, your portfolio of places to put workloads should include colo facilities, and it's good that Aviatrix is bundling that into its portfolio and sort of implicitly recognizing that WPPs should include should include colo facilities.
Yeah, if you're networking as a service company, which essentially Aviatrix is, you want to be where your customers in the cloud are, and a lot of them are in places like an Equinix or a Megaport because they can get faster connections into the public cloud services they're using. So as the overlay, makes absolute sense that Aviatrix would be there.
Yep, absolutely. So that's it from the cloud networking space for this week. But Drew, I think you have a couple of Microsoft announcements to talk through.
Yeah, two sort of semi-related Microsoft stories. First, Microsoft is alerting Entra ID customers that it will no longer let new Entra ID tenants skip multi-factor authentication. This is an effort to enforce a secure by default posture. The company says, quote, "We're removing the option to skip multi-factor authentication registration for 14 days when security defaults are enabled. This means all users will be required to register for MFA on their first login after security defaults are turned on. This default setting will affect new Entra tenants starting December 2nd, 2024, and then it's going to be rolled out to existing tenants in January 2025. So if you are on Entra, this may affect you. I will note that the MFA requirements require the use of the Microsoft Authenticator app. And if you are already using Microsoft Conditional Access in Entra ID, the MFA security default doesn't apply to you. We've got a link to the blog and some other resources if this is piquing your interest.
Yeah, and I would just have to say, Drew, I mean, maybe this is my perspective, but this is kind of motherhood and apple pie. I mean, like, deploy MFA should be baseline security for any organization. So the fact that Microsoft's getting around to enforcing it is good, but it should have been sort of, it's one of those things they probably should have done a while ago, but oh well, they're doing it now. What can you say? I mean, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad they're doing a secure by default play. I'm glad they're giving time for folks to adjust to it. I think initially the cloud providers were like, let's make it as easy as possible to get folks up on these services and start consuming them and using them so we can get them onto this platform. Security tends to cause friction, and a lot of people avoid it for that reason. So I'm glad they're taking the step to say, no, you just have to do this going forward, especially for something like Entra ID, which is, literally keys to the kingdom. So providing that at the very least, multi-factor authentication if you're not using conditional access or privileged information management or privileged access management solutions around that, makes total sense to me. And I'm glad to see Microsoft at long last putting its foot down and saying, yeah, you just have to do it.
Yeah, and I want to highlight something that I think was implicit in what you just said, which is, you know, listeners have heard me bash Microsoft for cybersecurity issues, and we'll talk about that in just a second as well. But part of the problem is that not so much that the capabilities aren't there, but that Microsoft hasn't forced people into using them. So configuration is actually one of the ability to configure something in an insecure way is actually one of the weaknesses that Microsoft has had, and it's good to see them shoring up this particular weakness in this particular case. And again, as you said, this is the keys to the kingdom, so this is a good place to start.
Yeah. So moving on, and again, related to Microsoft and security, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella asked the Microsoft board to cut his cash incentive payment by half to, quote, reflect his personal accountability, end quote, regarding Microsoft's ability to adapt and respond to today's cybersecurity landscape. The board agreed, and instead of a $10 million cash incentive, he got $5 million. I will note that his total annual compensation, including stocks, is over $79 million. That's according to the Register. So, John, to a normal person, $5 million is a lot of money. To the Microsoft CEO, it really isn't. So as a personal gesture, I guess I respect it, but as sort of a tool or a mechanism to promote or enforce better security practices at large tech companies, I still feel like it's a little wanting.
Well, and Drew, just to highlight something, I think you had originally titled this one, Nadella gives up a new ivory back scratcher over security failures. Maybe you can elaborate on the ivory back scratcher because it's pretty funny.
So people may remember a Simpsons episode where Homer Simpson used the company healthcare system to buy a serum that grew his hair back. And when the boss, Mr. Burns, found out about it, he was like, I was going to buy a new ivory back scratcher with that money. So that's what I feel like this $5 million is to Nadella. An ivory back scratcher, and he probably already has three. So again, it feels like, yeah, okay, it's a gesture, but
Yeah, it's my third best ivory back scratcher. Oh well. That said, I will highlight and I will admit very cheerfully that this is from a personal perspective. I feel vindicated because this is Microsoft taking ownership at the highest levels of the
Mhm.
fact that they have in fact been inadequate in cybersecurity. So basically, if you're listening to this and you're getting ready to send up an FU that says, "Hey, Jonna, stop bashing Microsoft for cybersecurity," please note that the CEO of Microsoft has actually taken responsibility for its poor cybersecurity. So I'm in good company at least. But go ahead and send that FU because we do like to hear from you, even if you're yelling at me for bashing Microsoft.
Right.
It's a symbolic gesture, but symbolic gestures sometimes matter. And the fact that Microsoft is acknowledging failures in this space is at least better than not acknowledging them and saying it's not our fault. It's somebody else's fault, which is most of their public proclamations up to this date. So it's good to see the CEO going, no, it's actually my fault.
And putting a number on it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, moving along from Microsoft and cybersecurity, we can talk more about some networking gear. Extreme Networks just announced that it's enhancing its universal ZTNA with greater intelligence. Extreme has added new capabilities to its ZTNA product, and these are aimed at simplifying management and troubleshooting. And one of the announcements allows automated discovery of applications within the organization, which is actually kind of a big deal because that is a huge problem in enterprise organizations.
Mhm.
And then quick assignment of access policies to them. This is a big deal largely because if you've the biggest challenge for folks in setting up access policies is I don't know what apps I have, I don't know who owns them, and I can't figure out like what the access policies ought to be. At this point, this enables the network engineers in an extreme environment to say, okay, I know what's there, and I'm going to take some default policy, which is nobody gets access until the application owner calls me, which is guaranteed to generate a great deal of chaos and turmoil initially, but will
Absolutely.
certainly get everything sorted out very quickly,
Right.
which is great if you know what applications are there. Another enhancement brings the ability to adjust policies from the dashboard directly, which speeds access to access troubleshooting processes. In other words, the ability to troubleshoot access issues. And the last one is automated centralized management of access policies across the entire Extreme infrastructure. And I think that last one was the real reason I thought this was an interesting news item because Extreme, Juniper, HP, Cisco are all of a sudden touting their centralized management.
Mhm.
And, Drew, I think we've talked about in the past how centralized management has failed to be a differentiator and failed even to be a sales differentiator for most network vendors. So it's kind of good to see everybody embracing it since it really is kind of important. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I mean, I guess I feel like everybody's been talking about centralized management for ages. And I think one of the reasons it's news for Extreme is that they've grown through acquisition. So they've had a lot of different products coming in from different companies under their portfolio. So wrangling it all into one centralized management console probably took a lot of work under the covers. I'll also say there is, I think, sort of a renewed interest in a quote unquote platform play among all the vendors where the idea is essentially no more of this best of breed stuff. We want you all in on all our gear and not the competitors' gear. And if you're going to do that, you do need centralized management before you can effectively execute that platform strategy. So I think this is Extreme maybe trying to get that in place to also drive toward a platform strategy like you'll see from, Palo Alto Networks, Fortinet, Cisco, everybody else.
Yeah, no, that's actually an excellent point. It's sort of like, no, we're done playing nicely in a multi-vendor environment. Go buy everything from
Yeah,
us. All your network gear are belong to us, right?
we can stop pretending. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's worth noting that Extreme has actually made a strong push for what it calls mission critical environments. So airports and healthcare organizations where, failure is not an option. So there's a possibility that what's behind this is that Extreme wants to be the go-to player for those particular kinds of environments, which I would argue it has a decent shot at. Let's see. I'm always skeptical of the platform approach, or we call it the big rock approach to networking. But, maybe the time has finally come. We shall see.
Extreme also makes a lot of noise about its play in stadiums and sports places, which I guess don't quite count as mission critical unless you are just an uber mad sports fan. But
I
that's
was
a
gonna
different discussion.
say, I was gonna say, if you're a football player or a football watcher, that is mission critical. I mean, you
Well,
can't
it doesn't
fail
affect
to
the
see.
game. They can still play the football. You just can't, do
But
the
if you
betting
can't
online while you're
see and
watching.
weigh in or whatever it is you're doing on your sports
Right.
stadium, oh my God, the
Probably
world is
betting.
ended. Yeah, probably. There you go. And on that note, Cisco has now announced AI pods, which sounds kind of interesting and alien. Starting in November, Cisco customers interested in keeping more of their confidential AI training data off the cloud will be able to order pre-configured UCSX infrastructure pods designed to support on-premise AI training. A pod's chassis can house up to 8 compute nodes and 4 GPUs connected by PCIe. The pod's internal data network delivers 100 gigs per compute node and up to 800 gigs of uplink capacity. The storage network supports up to 7.4 terabytes throughout. Along with the base hardware, the pods include software such as NVIDIA's AI Enterprise and HPCX toolkits and Red Hat's OpenShift. So now you can buy your AI training pod from Cisco and put it on premise. This all sounds really great, particularly given that in our most recent research, half of folks are doing on-prem AI. So people have a place to put this, and 12% of folks are also doing AI training on edge compute platforms. However, I'd like to point out that the hardware energy requirements are non-trivial. So if you're
Mm.
all excited about the AI pods and you're looking forward to installing them, please do some calculation about what your AI GPUs are actually going to cost you in energy. We recently did this for a client and discovered that just to do AI training for a specific application was going to increase their cost by about $300,000 a year.
Wow.
Um, so the point isn't that Cisco's AI pods will cost that much. The point is that you need to, if you're thinking about bringing AI on-prem generally and you want to put your Cisco AI pods where you're putting your other AI stuff, you really want to think about how you're providing energy to those facilities, because it may be above and beyond what you had previously budgeted for or engineered for.
Yeah, I think in regards to anything with AI, the capacity and energy consumption is going to be part of your calculations. You should be definitely looking at that on the spreadsheet. I have had conversations with several different sort of startups in the space who are bringing AI into organizations with sort of pre-trained models that you then run your own data on, different kinds of data. It could be networking data, it could be application data, and so on. And customers don't want that going into a public cloud a lot of times. So I think there will be an appetite for on-prem infrastructure like this, where you can use a pre-existing model and then run new data in it to do that new inferencing, new training. So I think it's smart for Cisco to sort of start aligning its own infrastructure capacity here. I wouldn't be surprised to see capabilities like this coming from its competitors. Quick break to tell you about our sponsor today, Palo Alto Networks. From a hybrid workforce to digital transformation initiatives, today's businesses are adapting to a new landscape that demands automation, increased productivity without sacrificing on robust security. Palo Alto Networks hope you'll join them for SASE Converge 2024. This is an on-demand virtual event that features experts and technologists from leading organizations across the globe who share how AI-powered SASE is transforming IT and end-user experiences while raising the bar on security. You'll learn how the latest SASE advancements can safeguard your data, streamline your operations, and secure your hybrid workforce. Visit saseconverge.paloaltonetworks.com to register and watch on demand. That's saseconverge.paloaltonetworks.com.
And that is
And
SASE, in case you're wondering.
SASE, yes, just in case. That's a good.
Right.
So we're going to wrap up with some financial results. We'll start with Juniper Networks. This may be their final or maybe penultimate report as a standalone company. They did announce their Q3 2024 results. The company earned revenues of $1.3 billion, down 5% year over year, with net income of $92.6 million, up 22% year over year. CEO Rami Rahim said they saw strong orders from cloud customers for back-end and front-end networking gear for AI infrastructure, and double-digit order growth from enterprise and service provider verticals. By vertical, the enterprise business had revenues of $592 million, down 16% versus last year. Service provider revenues of $389 million were down 7%, and cloud was a bright spot. Cloud revenues were $349.6 million, up 30%.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me, Drew, because certainly it's not been a deep, dark secret that Juniper is likely to get acquired by HPE. And frankly, when you look at service providers in particular, they're not going to go out and buy buy gear from a vendor. I mean, some of them did, obviously, but there was a decline in revenue from service providers because the service providers are looking at this saying, hey, I plan five to 7 years out, and I'm not sure where Juniper is going because
Mm.
acquisitions are always risky.
Mhm.
So, okay. And I think the enterprise business being down 16% also just reflects, what you referred to earlier, which is sort of the pitched battle for platforms that all of the vendors are making now. And I think that's where Juniper and HPE together are stronger than either company alone. So I think that was what motivated the original acquisition move. So
Yeah.
basically,
So
no surprise.
no surprise. Yeah. I'm curious to see if they can squeeze one more out or if this is going to be it. And of course, we will find out early next year. Moving on, Amazon announced its Q3 financial results, which include results for its AWS business unit, which is what we're interested in. AWS sales were 27.5 billion, up 19% year over year, with operating income of 10.4 billion. And while AWS is still showing respectable sales growth, it's fallen behind major US competitors. CNBC says Microsoft saw a 33% increase in cloud revenues, and Google Cloud revenues were up 35%. So just a sign that AWS is now, its competitors are in hot pursuit and doing well.
Yeah, and I think the only thing to highlight is the fact that, it was AWS's game to lose in a sense because they were
Right.
early to the
Very
cloud
early.
providers and, to Amazon's infinite credit, they figured out how to serve customers very well. But you would expect that their growth rate would slow down while the, later to the game folks are ramping up.
One other note that jumped out at me from the CNBC coverage, Amazon is apparently spending huge amounts of money to invest in infrastructure. For the quarter, they had capital expenditures of 22.6 billion, up 81% year over year. And much of that spending is, you can imagine, on data centers, data center infrastructure, and NVIDIA GPUs. That does make sense to me. I think generally as a strategy, since he started Amazon, Jeff Bezos has proven himself willing to essentially try to outspend competitors and just run lean or even run at a loss while he tries to squeeze them out. That may have been effective against like bookstores and mom and pop retailers. I don't know how effective it could be against Google's and Microsoft's of the world, but they are not taking their foot off the gas.
Yeah, and I would just argue that it tends to be a fairly successful strategy in general because Bezos has always basically said, hey, if I'm making a profit, something's wrong, which sounds kind of stupid for a public company, but is not because his logic is if I'm making a profit, that means there's money left over after our operations, which means that there's money I haven't plowed into R&D and how to get better and more competitive against my competitors. So that's a mistake. And I'm very much simplifying this business strategy, but that's pretty much what he had. And I would have to say I agree with it 100% because he's not plowing that money into, plush carpeting in the executive suites. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of plush carpeting, but, Amazon famously runs lean. What he
Mhm.
really is doing is plowing it back into R&D. So to the extent that you can make a one-to-one correlation between funding R&D and having effective results from R&D, that's actually a very good strategy. Now, just because you pay for R&D doesn't mean you will have successful results from it, but that's a double click down that is, you first have to have the money and first have to be able to invest and second have to make sure your investments are paying off. So I think it's a good move. And I think, the difference here is that he's investing in infrastructure as opposed to R&D. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
I mean, it's certainly been good for NVIDIA, if
Yeah,
nobody else.
if for nobody else.
Speaking of which, if NVIDIA is rolling in money being spent by AWS and its ilk, Intel is watching that gravy train roll by without a drop being spilled on its own plate. Intel reported its Q3 2024 revenues. They pulled in 13.3 billion, down 6% compared to this quarter last year. The company also lost 16.6 billion in the quarter. And yes, I did double check that number, 16 billion in one quarter. That loss is essentially attributable to some planned restructuring and impairment charges the company is taking as it tries to drive down costs. Those charges include almost 10 billion for, and this is according to the press release, the establishment of a valuation allowance against U.S. deferred tax assets. I'm not entirely sure what that means. I guess I could just get ChatGPT to translate it for me, but I assume it has something to do with taxes and depreciation or setting money aside because they know a tax bill is coming or something. But they took out 10 billion for that. There's other charges in the billions for depreciation of assets and restructuring. So this 16 billion was essentially kind of a one-time loss. They're taking this pain upfront, fast and hard as they can, as they try to move forward and get the company back on a profitability path.
Well, and I think, Drew, you have mentioned this is part of Pat Gelsinger's strategy since he took over. Take the hard stuff up front, get them over
Yeah.
with, and then move forward. Let's see how well they go. I think honestly, what we're seeing here is something everybody knows, and even Intel has admitted, which is that they absolutely missed the boat on AI, which is frustrating because I know internally inside the company there were people beating the drums saying, guys, we got to get to this AI. NVIDIA's going to eat our lunch, and didn't get listened to. So hopefully they will, as part of what they're doing, retune how they do their strategy, because they've got an enormous, they've got enormous intellectual capital inside the company. If they would just listen to them, maybe things would be better and less painful going forward.
Yeah. Well, they say things are going to get better in Q4 and onward. We will wait and see what the results are, but just taking a big hit up front and getting it over with.
Yep.
That does wrap up the news. Jonna, where can folks get more from you if they want to find you online?
Okay, best place to find me online is at my company, nemertes.com. That's N like Nancy, EMEERTES.com. And you can also hit me up on LinkedIn. I definitely answer both places.
Awesome. I'm Drew Conry-Murray. I'm on Blue Sky at DrewCM, and I blog at packetpushers.net. And as we mentioned earlier, we love to get feedback from you. If you have a question, a comment, a correction, or just want to weigh in on something we said, packetpushers.net/FU. The FU is for follow-up, and we do read everything you send and often respond to it here on the show. So please do hit us up. As always, thanks for listening.